Welcome to State Lobbying Heroes Podcast, a podcast where we delve into the careers and personal life stories of some of the best and the brightest state government relations experts. I'm your host, Deepak, CEO of Legistracker. My guest today is Seth Palmer. Seth is a native from North Carolina and currently works at the NC Realtors Association as a director of regulatory affairs and external communications. He also serves as a volunteer in several organizations. Without further ado, here's Seth. Hi, Seth. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Deepak. How are you?
I'm doing great. How is your family doing in this quarantine situation, in the COVID thing? Are they handling it fine?
Yeah, we're doing pretty well. I have a 2-year-old daughter, and just trying to keep her occupied as best we can, and just keep things moving. But my wife and I are both working from home, and that's certainly the new normal. But nothing that crazy.
That's great. So let's jump in and let's start from the beginning. Let's say we're now sitting in the time machine. Can you give us an idea as to where did you grow up? Were you from North Carolina itself?
Yeah, so I grew up in Wilmington, North Carolina. My family had been in Wilmington for a long time, so you can probably tell based on my accent, I am a native North, or at least a native Southerner, but a native North Carolinian. Grew up in Wilmington my whole life until I turned 18 and came to NC State in Wilmington. Love going back and forth to the beach. Would love to be there a lot more right now, but we'll see how things go as time goes on.
Yeah, I've been to Wilmington a couple of times, and it's a pretty good beach there compared to like Myrtle Beach. I feel like the Wilmington beach is less commercial.
Yeah, it's definitely a much more laid back, more traditional beach community. No real big hotels on the beach front. Not a lot of other like retail or restaurants. I mean, that's certainly limiting for a lot of folks, but for those of us who've spent our whole life there, we know where to go get good food and have good times down there without having a whole ton of people on the beach, even during huge holidays.
Yeah, I saw your tweet about the number of food items or something like that, where you've basically eaten most of the southern food. Is that what it was?
Yeah, I did one of those tests of how southern are you, and it was like 30 things. How many of the 30 have you eaten? And I think I went through, done at least 20, in the high 20s. There's some stuff that I don't really have any interest in eating and didn't grow up with it, so I didn't ever develop a taste for them. But other than the really off the wall things like pig's feet and pickled eggs, I've tried it at least once.
Yeah, so you definitely qualify as a southerner. So your schooling was in Wilmington, and then you moved to Raleigh for North Carolina State University. Is that what it was?
Yeah, I started my undergraduate degree from NC State. I started there in 2004 and went through school from 04 to 2008. Loved NC State. Really had a great opportunity there. While when I came into undergrad, I didn't necessarily think that State was where I wanted to be. I grew up a UNC fan, so had that allegiance to Chapel Hill in my head. But as I look back on my time at NC State and my work since then, I love everything about what that university puts out and the opportunities that they provided me, especially having my degrees in political science. So having a little more non-traditional liberal arts education has been extremely helpful to me, especially in many of the roles that I've had in understanding different sectors of government and different sectors of business, because it wasn't just a straight book learning liberal arts education. So that was really great. And I made a ton of friends in the lobbying community of NC State graduates. It is extremely tight knit because there's not that many of us out there. So that's been even better in my professional career.
Did you know that you always had the passion to get into political science?
So I always had the odd idea of becoming a lawyer. I think was where I really started out. I had the idea going into college of, okay, I want to go to law school. I want to get in a legal profession. And when I was in, I guess my freshman year of undergrad, I had taken enough AP classes in high school to place out. I was actually a history major to start off with. I had taken enough AP classes to place out of the freshman level history. And so my advisor said, "Oh, well, you should go take something else and go take political science or whatever." And so I did. And I love that side of the educational opportunities because it combines history and practical experience. And so that was where my passion really hit off. I mean, I'd always had an interest in American history, so applying the American political tradition as well as a lot of the comparative work that's done was super interesting to me. And so that's really where I'm sure my advisor thought about it. He may not have thought he was pushing me out of the history department, but he ultimately did. And so I went into political science and really loved it. I didn't after continuing in political science ever go to law school. So I get the opportunity to be a non-attorney lobbyist right now. And as I've learned through my professional experience, I really love the intricacies of what the political system at both the state and the national level really provide.
So once you finished your degree at NCSU, you ended up as an intern, am I right?
Yeah, I through some friends that I had made at NC State, one in particular, a gentleman by the name of Tony Caravano, who was student body president while I was at NC State. He was a couple years ahead of me. He was working in the General Assembly for Senator Basnight at the time, and then had just recently left to take a role with the UNC system. And I reached out to him and said, "Hey, do you know anybody who's looking for an intern or looking?" I was really looking for any type of work right after I graduated, and he was able through his connections to connect me with the House Majority Leader at the time, a gentleman from Davidson County by the name of Hugh Heilman. And I literally came up here on the Thursday before the 4th of July of 2008, interviewed with his staff, and was told to be back by Tuesday of the next week. And that was when I started in my career. So
nice. That's very cool. Okay.
Yeah, I loved working for Representative Heilman. He was not only the majority leader of the House at the time, which was both the House and the Senate were in Democratic majority at the time, but he also chaired the insurance committees and worked on a lot of really detailed and technical legislation. It was around the time when we were going into the recession that happened around that time. And so some of the early things we were seeing and the early impacts that were happening, that was a part of his work. We also were working at the time to make some of the modifications and reforms to the state employees health insurance plan, as well as to what's known as the beach plan, which is high risk insurance for those in the coastal communities. And so those were really fun. And then the biggest piece of legislation that I worked on with Representative Heilman was a bill he had tried a couple of times before, which was what's affectionately known as the smoking ban bill, which banned smoking in all bars and restaurants and public places. And I had the opportunity to work through the passage of that legislation in 2009 and see it implemented. And that I count as one of the greatest opportunities and achievements of anything that I've done in my career. In my office, I have a copy of that bill, as well as a pen that was used by Governor Perdue to sign that, and that will always be a cherished memento from what I've been able to do in legislative policy and government affairs.
So was that already passed in other states?
You had seen passage of smoking bans in other places, probably in the previous 5 years before we worked on the bill in North Carolina. I think the two reasons why we were so passionate and worked hard on it, first and foremost, because Representative Heilman himself was a lung cancer survivor. He had lung cancer previous to running the bill the first time, and then actually he had a recurrence at a point during the final run of the bill. He's ultimately recovered in both respects and is doing very well, enjoying his retirement from what I understand. But we also were leading the pack as really the first tobacco producing state to take this action. I mean, and you think back in 2008, 2009, pre-recession, while a lot of the states' tobacco industry had already taken a relatively significant hit from the master settlement in the late 90s and in the early 2000s, they really were still operational in North Carolina. And what we were trying to strike a balance was not to say that tobacco, which is the state's largest export commodity and a huge driver of the agricultural economy and the economy as a whole, was not important, but that the health and safety of individual North Carolinians through being in public around smoking was of a high level of importance. And that was why protecting just individuals who weren't smoking, who were being affected negatively by the dangers of secondhand smoke, there wasn't this like extra burden placed on them. And while I think at the time there were a lot of negative arguments from the business community and from individual rights organizations who said, hey, this is infringing on my right, it was made very clear that this was looking not in infringing on somebody's rights, but protecting somebody's health.
Right.
And the bill has been challenged in various capacities, not ever really in a significant legal challenge, but it's been continued to be upheld. And I would say it's now weird to go into for anybody to go into a restaurant or into a bar where they do allow smoking.
Correct.
I talk to a lot of people and it's like, yeah, you just don't even think about it anymore. It hasn't really even been gone for that long.
Correct.
So it's something that was really important, not just to Representative Heilman, but to everybody who worked on it and to the state as a whole. And I'm really proud to have been involved.
That is awesome. I mean, that's the part which I kind of admire about lobbyists, is that they kind of work behind the scenes to actually advocate for legislation which directly impacts like the end user. Mm-hmm. So and you guys don't get that much recognition, as much you deserve it though. So
well, yeah, and on that bill we had a lot of really great lobbyists who came in to help the legislative staff and to work with folks like me who were on the legislative side to get it passed. So folks who represented not just the groups you would think of, your American Heart Association, the Lung and Cancer Societies, all those health-based groups, but also other business groups who recognized that this was kind of the tide was turning that way, and it was important to be in support of it because it opened up some other marketing and market opportunities. So it was a great coalition, and I've always, throughout my career, been very fortunate to be in a lot of great coalition and work on issues that were consensus focused as opposed to just fighting an uphill battle by ourselves.
That is true. So you, apart from working on that, so this was like, for how long did you work as an intern there?
I was there for about 9-10 months. I was there from the summer of 2008 till around the summer of 2009.
Gotcha. And apart from working on this legislation, you were also doing some bill tracking, legislative research, and all of that stuff. Okay.
Yeah, I did a lot of, as an intern, not just in a big office, but really an intern in the General Assembly in general. You do all manner of things. You write letters, you do research, you do committee staffing, all that. I think by the time I ended my time with Representative Heilman, I had done pretty much every in and out piece you can do. I was very fortunate to have a great a legislative assistant who I worked under. She was very open and very willing to let me take different reins, and certainly a representative who was very willing and open to let me take on anything and everything. So I learned a huge amount, not just about his office and his constituents, but also about the legislature and the overarching process.
And do you recommend, as the first step, like let's say if someone wants to get into lobbying, what do you suggest looking back in time? What would you suggest that they should do first to get a hands-on experience? Is being an intern the best thing they should do, or anything else?
I think having any opportunity to get into the general, if you want to be a lobbyist in North Carolina and to be in the General Assembly, having any opportunity to get in to the building to work with either legislators or with other lobbyists to learn the ropes, essentially. North Carolina is not necessarily unique or special in any of our systems, but we are peculiar in our systems. I'm sure, Deepak, as you see through tracking, the things we do are a little bit weird sometimes. Yeah. And there's truly some reasons for that, actually. Some of them that's just how we've done it, but there are other more structural reasons based on how our state was structured. But I think it's also building those relationships. And if you're an intern working in the building day in and day out, whether it's for a summer or for longer, you build those relationships with legislators, and more importantly, with the legislative assistants and staff. Legislators, while super important to know as a lobbyist and as just a general practitioner in government affairs and legislative relations, the legislative assistants and the staff, the clerk's office, the sergeant at arms, anybody at the bill filing, bill tracking, research, legislative analysis, all this staff are even more important because they outlive legislators. They're legislative assistants in that building who have moved from legislator to legislator, whether through retirement or through loss and election. But those staffers, those folks are so qualified and capable that they continue on. And so having those relationships continue, if they know that you're trustworthy and capable, they'll give you a little bit more of a leeway and intelligence and insight. I mean, I deal with some LAs in the building who were there when I was there. They're still there. They may be with different legislators, but they've continued on, and they are so trusted by their legislator, especially those who've stayed with the one person for at this point, for me, it'll be almost 12 years. That person trusts them more than anything. And so if I need something, I know that I can go and work with them. And it's probably sometimes a little bit easier to find them than to find their boss.
Yeah.
And so that's something so I absolutely, if folks have an opportunity to take a legislative internship, whether it's while they're still in school or during their summer or after school, that's a huge thing. And if they can find a lobbyist internship, go work with a firm or go work with an individual or somebody like that. I mean, there are a lot of lobbyists who track a ton of bills and who do a lot of committee work. They always take on interns to help lighten their load. And through that, you'll learn a huge amount as well.
Yeah, that is a very key insight you bring in. But I never thought that typically the relationships you build are primarily with the senators and the legislators. But what you bring in is very insightful, because you need to have relationships even with the administrative assistants, and you have to have the right channel to get to them. So,
Oh, sure. I mean, and don't get me wrong. I mean, the relationship with legislators is still the primary goal.
Correct.
But I can be really clear and say, not this necessarily from personal experience having happened to me, but I can tell you from having sat in an office with working for a legislator, and being their gatekeeper. If you've burned the staff as a lobbyist, if you've come in and been a jerk to the legislative assistant or not gone around, then like just continue to push and essentially not follow the rules, essentially, you can get shut out from meeting with a legislator.
Oh, okay.
I mean, these are folks who are deeply trusted. I mean, it's not saying that you'll never be able to get in the door, but if you, I mean, these like I said, these legislators rely on their staff. They have other jobs. They
Right.
are not a permanent legislature. And so if you treat their staff like crap, they're not necessarily going to be as trusting of you of being upfront and forthright with them. So I've seen it happen, and every time I teach anybody about lobbying and do different things to explain it, that's something I try to leave with everybody is the staff can be your best friend or your worst enemy.
So let's fast forward a bit. So now, after being an intern, then you were a director of constituent services. Can you just
Mm-hmm.
explain what that experience was all about and what does it entail?
Sure. So I had the opportunity to join former Lieutenant Governor Walter Dalton's staff as his Director of Constituent Services, which is really a long way of saying that I was the gatekeeper of any correspondence that came in. In the old days, a constituent service officer dealt mainly with letters. For us, it was more emails and requests that came in through digital platforms. So getting requests to send a certificate congratulating somebody on attaining their Eagle Scout or on their graduation, and sending letters to various folks in just kind of a general correspondence manner. That was what fell under my purview. But also in that role, I had the opportunity to take on some policy work and engage on a variety of different issues that the Lieutenant Governor was working on. The Lieutenant Governor in the state has a pretty small staff given their limited constitutional authority. But through that, I got to work with the Lieutenant Governor in a lot of different capacities. Got to go with him many days when he was serving as president of the Senate. So I got to sit on the Senate side, which was an awesome experience, and see a ton of very respected historic figures in the Senate, and folks I'm really glad I had the opportunity to see and engage with during that time, because a couple of them are no longer with us. And so that's an experience I really appreciate having. And it was a great time to work with the Lieutenant Governor. I love traveling around with him, and he taught me a ton, especially about writing. He's at his core a college professor. And so he would send your papers back dripping, but has made me a much better writer today. And I thank him for that.
No, that's awesome. So did this also involve like talking to other lobbyists? I mean, like, since you were on the other side of the table, did you have to like talk to lobbyists on this side, sitting on this side, or what was it?
It really didn't. This was probably the longest break I took from engaging with lobbyists per se, because lobbyists don't really, there's not a lot you can truly lobby the Lieutenant Governor for, as they can't introduce legislation, and they don't have any real impact on policy.
Gotcha.
At the executive level, they do sit on boards and commissions like the State Board of Education and State Board of Community Colleges. So there were certainly some times where lobbyists working in the more regulatory space and would have conversations and engage with him. And we did engage with some lobbyists when it came down to bills that were of interest to the Lieutenant Governor. He was very passionate about education and engaging on those topics. And so he worked with sitting legislators to move legislation forward, things like the cooperative innovative schools, early colleges in North Carolina. He was a leader on while he was a member of the Senate, and so he continued that during his time as Lieutenant Governor. But a lot of that was done through other legislators, as the Lieutenant Governor himself doesn't have a vote. So I still had the opportunity to engage with lobbyists and other government affairs professionals, but it was certainly a little bit different and not as normal or regular, I would say, as it was before and even after.
Gotcha. I see. And I also saw in your bio that you had to like maintain a website and wrote some blogs and everything as well. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, we were, this was 2009, 2010, so state government was still operating in the technological dark ages. I mean, we had websites for executive offices, but they were pretty lackluster, and and weeks. So we tried to look at opportunities to engage. I mean, this was early in the years of Twitter. Facebook had been around for a while, but it was still it had moved not that long before I started there. It had moved out of being just a university platform. So there were some opportunities, but trying to convince, especially elected officials who grew up without the internet,
Gotcha.
the opportunities through social media and technological based engagement was still some years off. So we tried, but it was certainly not what it is today.
So after the being a director, so you were there for how long again?
I was with the lieutenant governor for about a year and a half in-house.
Okay. So this was your first actual full-time job, I would say, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. No, about a year. And then you moved on to NC Department of Transportation. How did you end up in that job?
So through working with the lieutenant governor, I had the opportunity to engage on a policy area of what was known as the statewide logistics task force. It was a group that Governor Perdue had put together, chaired by the lieutenant governor and the secretary of the Department of Transportation, to look at the state's intermodal logistics capabilities. So our ability to move people, more than anything, people and freight, but heavily on the freight side. So the ports, the airports, the rail industry, and the road industry, but primarily infrastructure, but primarily for trucking. So I had started working on that group while with the lieutenant governor, and then had the opportunity to move to NCDOT to work on it in both a in-house role there as well as kind of a continuation, because we knew eventually the study capacity would end and then we would have to move to implementation. So I was there working on a lot of different programs and things that were offshoots, the logistics task force, and being able to look at greater opportunities for capacity and growth more than anything.
I see. And can you give a specific example of the kind of work you had there? I know, like I saw,
Sure.
like what were you saw, like there are like authorities, and you also worked on some merger or something like that. Is that what it is?
Yeah, so we were probably the biggest and easiest one to explain is that previous to working, so when I was with DOT, the North Carolina State Ports Authority had operated under the auspices of the Department of Commerce.
Mm-hmm.
And the Department of Commerce in North Carolina does a lot of great economic recruitment efforts and does a lot of policy and technical work on business in the state, but they don't do anything with regards to infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So they essentially have to ask other departments, whether it be Department of Transportation or any of the others who they may need something from for it. So if a company wants a road or whatever, they have to ask and work with the department on it. And so as the ports were in need of some infrastructure upgrades and really just a different mindset, because the State Ports Authority is both an economic engine as well as physical infrastructure. They operate two maritime port facilities, one in Wilmington, one in Morehead City, and it's known as an inland port, or it's a big rail and lay down infrastructure outside of Charlotte. So they have all these things that need to be upgraded, like including roads and cranes and trucks and all this other stuff. And it didn't make a lot of sense why a department who doesn't manage any of that, doesn't have that specific expertise, really was overseeing them. And so we worked to bring the Ports Authority under DOT to look at operational efficiencies. I mean, if you need to pave a road on a port facility, why go out to common bid and buy asphalt when you can work with the Department of Transportation, who buys tens of millions of tons of asphalt in a budgetary cycle.
Gotcha.
And can buy, I mean, they do all kinds of partnerships with local governments because they buy so much asphalt and paving materials, because you got to go out and pave the roads. And so it's like just finding operational efficiencies was the biggest thing. And so that was really fun project that got me into not only administrative work, but also strategic planning and strategic visioning, which was great. And I learned a lot.
That is so interesting that not only you have to think through as to, what specific organizations do, and then, why are they placed under a certain umbrella, and then you guys have to come in and then make the changes so that way they all work together. Am I right? So that's right. Gotcha.
Yeah. And a lot of the things that we did through those efforts have really, in the ensuing years, have turned some huge dividends. The North Carolina State Ports Authority has regained a lot of the prominence that it had long ago, and built upon it through the leadership of the team that's on site right now, but using a lot of the mindset shifts that we had hoped would take hold.
And did this involve any advocacy efforts? I mean, did you have to make any changes to policy, or is this not at all related?
Not really. This was, again, another time. I mean, we worked with a lot of different industry representatives, so had a lot of conversations with the rail industry, with the trucking industry, with the airports and the airlines and other people who were engaged. And so there were folks in the advocacy arena who were communicated with, but a lot more on their community development arm, which some lobbyists and advocacy professionals do in addition to their legislative advocacy. It did ultimately, to make the final transfer, it did require legislation, but it was done through a consensus bill. It wasn't contentious at all, really. We were able to move it forward without much legwork. And being a state department, that certainly means you conduct a different degree of advocacy before the General Assembly through legislative liaisons and through more communications than actual advocacy. I mean, you're as a government entity, it's a little counterintuitive to lobby the very government of which you are a part of. Okay. And so you engage with them in a little bit of a different way, but still could somewhat be construed as advocacy in some capacity.
Gotcha. So what would be the one feather in your cap during that NCDOT experience, which is the one which would stand out? And what was it that you remember, like, this is what I got away from it?
I would say the biggest thing from NCDOT was the completion of the statewide logistics task force and the development of it's about a 200-page report, and then its companion, the North Carolina Maritime Study, that presented at the time and even holding still today the most comprehensive examination of the state's logistics opportunities. And to see a lot of the things that we recommended and that we proposed through both of those studies come to fruition through the great work of the teams at the State Ports Authority, as well as at NCDOT over the ensuing years, has been something I take with me, and I'm proud to have had an initial and small hand in that time.
Very cool. Very cool. And how long were you there at NCDOT?
I was there for about a year or so.
Okay. And then before you moved to NC Realtors, and that's where you are right now, you had brief stints at Translock and Longleaf Strategy Group. So what were those about? Yeah, so after I left NCDOT, I took a brief dip into transportation technology, into the startup world. So Translock is a company based in the Triangle who does essentially GPS tracking of transit systems. Nice. They got their start at NC State. They have an app like you would have for most things now, where you can actually see when your bus is going to come. And they have clients across the country, including here in the Triangle, folks like Triangle Transit and NC State's Wolf Line. So I worked for a very brief period on their municipal accounts team. I gained a lot of insight and understanding into the technology space. Also learned that I'm not necessarily the best inside salesperson. So knew that was probably not a long-term opportunity for me, just based on my abilities. But then I was able and fortunate to found my own consulting group, which I operated for a brief period, both before I joined NC Realtors as well as for a little bit after. I worked primarily on communications strategy and communications development for
nonprofits and some other organizations. I stayed a little bit in the transportation space more during that time, and in some areas that I really enjoyed from my time at NCDOT. So working with some partners that I'd formed there, and looking at engagement, and that gave me, while my time at Translate took me fully outside of the government affairs and advocacy arena. Creating my own group really gave me the opportunity to come back. It also taught me a lot of things about myself, including that business recruitment is not exactly my interest. I was much more capable, having started in a government space where you kind of ate what was brought to you. The eat what you kill type mindset is a much different one, and one that before I take that on again, I need to be a lot more cognizant of the challenges and the risk.
Yeah, that is quite interesting. Then I looked at your bio, and that the other thing which I was really impressed with is like you are a volunteer for a lot of organizations, right? So how do you handle that time? And I mean, what are your roles in those different volunteer organizations?
I think when I was younger and didn't have as much kind of encumbrances or responsibilities, I took on anything and everything. I worked with a lot of great organizations and was able to do a lot of fun things. And now that I have a family, have a much more stable life cycle, and things that I'm responsible for and need my involvement, and really things I want to be involved in, I've taken a much different look at my engagement with volunteer nonprofit roles. And so I've taken on probably what would be seen a little bit more of the executive side of things. So serving on boards, doing more of the oversight and advisory work. So I serve on some advisory boards for nonprofits in town, and just really do that, while I would love to continue the hands-on event-based work that I've gotten to do in previous years. It's just not feasible with a little kid, a wife, and trying to work in the way that I do.
Right. So now it's like the circle comes around. So now you're in NC Realtors. How did you get into it? And what is it that you initially started working on? And then, what are you working on right now?
Sure. So I've been exposed to NC Realtors for the entire time I've been in government affairs. The lobbying team there has historically been widely respected. My current chief lobbyist at NC Realtors, by the name of Katie Thomas, very early on, she's represented the Realtors. She's represented the Realtors as long as I've been involved with government affairs. So she and I've known each other, had a great relationship. And when the opportunity opened at the association, I jumped at it to join a great group of folks representing a diverse membership.
And how many lobbyists are there in that?
Right now, we're at a lobbying team of about 9, primarily contract based. When I joined the association, there were about 4.
Okay.
We've expanded our team to respond to different needs. We've also diversified in a lot of experience levels. But I started out working in local government affairs. I worked for one of our local groups of realtors. We've got 46 local associations that are based primarily in either county or larger city areas. So think of the major cities, they each have their realtor association. So Raleigh, Charlotte, Wilmington, and they have branches that go out into other communities, not just specific to one county or one city. But I worked with the folks down in Pinehurst and in Sanford, so I got the opportunity to work in local government affairs for a little while before shifting into the communications and more advocacy role. And now I serve as the Director of Regulatory Affairs and External Communications, so oversee our internal member-based advocacy communications. So advocacy alerts, calls to action, member education on advocacy and legislative issues. I also deal with our external communications, so media engagement, other kind of platforms to ensure our message is getting out. outside of our membership. And then finally is my lobbying piece. I serve as the association's lead regulatory lobbyist. So I work in regulatory boards like the Real Estate Commission, the Appraisal Board, others who deal in the non-legislative activity of the real estate industry or kind of tertiary things connected to it, but then also serve as a legislative lobbyist, working primarily issue-based on regulatory policy. So anytime reg reform comes up, that's usually when I'm back in the legislative building. And I get the opportunity to, because we have such a great and diverse team, I get to engage with them a lot and engage with them and help to tell the story of what they see day in and day out at the General Assembly. That's a huge part of what we try to tell our members, because they know we have lobbyists, but it's great to give them like truly detailed intelligence of like, okay, this is what your lobbyists are doing.
So yeah, let's just, if I had to take a step back. So what is NC Realtors about? Is it about the realtors? I mean, like what kind of policy? I mean, what is it that they do? I mean, what is it that you guys are involved? Yeah.
So as an organization which represents over 48,000 licensed real estate practitioners across the state, we are first and foremost concerned about the membership and ensuring that there are not policies or legislation or regulations that impede an individual's ability to conduct their business. So things historically like sales tax on services or transfer tax on real estate that really limit market opportunities and make it harder to conduct business. Those are things that come to mind immediately for the association, things that we've worked on historically to protect. But we also get into a lot of issues and interests related to the economic health and viability of the state, because the state's economy, the state's business climate is not healthy. Then the opportunities for real estate activity are limited. If you don't have new businesses coming to North Carolina, if you don't have businesses staying in North Carolina, there's not going to be a lot of interest or need for housing. Gotcha. And those who have houses, the market's not going to remain very good. So if they need to sell, they may take huge losses. And that's not healthy for not just my membership who rely on those transactions to support their families as independent contractors and as business people, but it also doesn't help anybody else in the state if our economy starts to fail. So we bridge over into that, and in a general session, I can give a biennium more than anything. We probably monitor anywhere from half to 2/3 of the bills that are out there. We may not have any direct interest in a good chunk of them because they're either duplicative. A lot of people like to file a bill with this essentially a copy of another one, but they put their county on that. They do. We can end up with 100 local bills that essentially are the same thing. You just changed out the county name in there because they want to put that out for their constituency. Mm-hmm. But then there are also just some other little pieces here and there and other bills that we try to track. And then there are always the super important high level issues that are at our core function. We try to combine those into our legislative priorities for the year, either in a proactive or a reactive way. And that's something that we make intentional efforts on behalf of the association to modify how we see things as we've seen an evolution in the General Assembly's focus on a lot of pieces, and that's probably the most fun thing I get to work on right now is more of the long-term strategy. We're fortunate to be in a good place to take those things on and to have a strong lobbying team that essentially keeps the lights on at the General Assembly, to keep the monitoring going while we're able at more of the staff level on the in-house to look in the long-term strategic vision.
Right. Okay. That kind of explains as to, what you guys do there. And what regulatory bodies do you work with at the assembly?
So I work external to the General Assembly. I work with the Real Estate Commission, the Appraisal Board, the Home Inspectors Licensure Board, the Coastal Resources Commission from time to time, occasionally the Building Code Council and the Environmental Management Commission, and then really anything else that may pop up. If one of the other, there's about, I believe it's 400 regulatory and oversight boards that exist in the state. I may be wrong there. I'll have to look at it again. They sometimes create new ones every year, so never know what the number is right now. Most of them don't have any direct impact on what my members deal with and care about, but from time to time they do, and so I try to keep a close watch on anything. Great to have keywords that are typically used for certain things. So if I get a pop-up, a Google alert or something through one of my regulatory monitors, it helped because it can be daunting to try to monitor that many boards.
Right, I understand. Yeah.
Irregular cycle.
Yeah. True, very true. So yeah, that's what you are currently working on at NC, and you've been here for about 5-6 years now.
Yeah, it'll be we're at 5.5 years almost.
That's very cool. That's cool. So looking back at the entire career you had, was there any specific challenge you specifically remember where you failed, but you did learn a lot?
Sure. I can't think of any specific bill, but I know that probably every session we fight to get something passed that ends up failing, and it hurt. I can go to one. I can actually go to one example. Towards the latter part of the 2018 session, we had been working with a coalition to move a piece of legislation forward on association health plans, and that's essentially an allowance for the creation of health insurance plans for members of associations that are independent contractors that don't have any employers, so they don't have any employee benefit, and they aren't really able, because of the way they're classified in taxes, to qualify for other health programs. So a lot of them go uninsured, and they just pay out of pocket every time they need to go to the doctor. And we've been working with a coalition to try a piece of legislation that was certainly not our greatest option. It wasn't a long-term strategy, but it was a necessary short-term fix. And we worked very hard. We communicated with legislators on both sides of the aisle in both chambers to try to get something workable. And we moved it forward knowing that it could be unsuccessful, but we thought going into it that it would be okay, that we would get through, and it would at least provide our members with a stopgap, with something while we worked on a larger proposal that we knew would take a little more time to get passed and get everything taken care of on. But when we got it on the floor of the House, and there's some decent debate, but there was some debate that wasn't really going our way. But then when one of the senior appropriations chairs who oversaw the health budget, when he stood up and spoke against it, that was when we knew it was done. And that was a hard pill to swallow. I mean, just to see a bill you've worked on that even though you knew might not be successful, just to see it go down as fast and as hard as it did. Right. Was difficult. I will say, kind of on the positive end of that, we were able to run a different, more comprehensive piece of legislation during the 19th session, and it was successful. So
awesome. Yeah,
all good things come in the end.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Seth. This was like a very enlightening session for me, and I hope to get in touch with you again sometime soon, and I really wish you the best.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Deepak.
All right, take care. Bye, Seth.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Interesting insights from Seth. Seth's Twitter handle is @SethPalmer. Palmer, SETH_PALMER. Thanks for joining us for another episode of State Lobbying Heroes. As always, please do leave us a comment how you feel these interviews can be improved. Until next episode, take care of yourselves and your family members.